Ladies and gentlemen of the crypto space, we're live on a Friday, March 21st at 12:09 p.m. We're going to start out a little bit, or we're going to be a little bit out of norm, starting this stream with complexities, technical realities, as compared to technical analysis of like chart data or what the hell is going on in markets. Everyone must recognize that if you're engaging in financial activity, you gotta have an understanding of accounting realities and legal realities, which implies legal constraints, but it's not necessarily a constraint. It's guidelines, meaning it's rules, meaning it's guardrails, it's roads to traverse, it's paths to understand and paths to find. That's the nature of the system in which you live now. I try and frame what I talk about not from my perspective, meaning I try and talk so much from the perspective of a person that's younger, because I think of myself and I remind myself that I was once young. And there's a great tendency in society to push things off to other people. Be like, all right, I'm engaging in crypto markets. Like, oh, what am I going to do during tax season? Oh, I dump it on an accountant. I dump it on whatever, TurboTax or Token Tax or someone else that understands the way the system works. And there's reasons why that's okay, because clearly, consistent with what we say about capital management, you can't engage with something that you don't understand, meaning you can't invest in crypto if you don't understand crypto. Stick to the stock market. If you don't understand the stock market, don't invest in the stock market. Use a 401k or use a financial advisor. You need to be proficient in the activities in which you engage. So it's understandable that so much of accounting is pushed off to a professional, or at least someone that has increasing expertise as compared to yourself. Now, there's one word that's also important that I think about so much being a parent, and that's called dependent. That means you're dependent on another person, which implies their professional capacity, their education, but also their opinion. Now, that's certainly understandable when you don't have experience with not only just capital management in the sense of a financial advisor, but also accounting in the sense of how the hell to traverse bookkeeping, as well as like entity construction, and especially accounting as it pertains to compliance and reporting. Um, but what could I possibly say? I have in my life engaged in two activities that have been a manifestation of OCD. Now, that obviously first started with my programming career, probably about 15 years ago at this point. And it wasn't an institutional education. I went to school for engineering and taught myself in traditional autodidact form how to be a top tier programmer for mobile Android. And that was certainly an exercise of OCD. Now, fast forward about 12 years later, because I've been doing this stuff for about 3 years, and I would have never thought that I could talk about this topic the way I can talk about it today. And 3 years in, certainly don't have capacity to be a diversified uh, with regard to accounting and all the rules, especially from a corporate standpoint. I have literally no knowledge whatsoever of corporate rules. That is a whole nother field. And in fact, you have accountants, you have specializations, just like you have specializations in being a doctor, cardiologist, proctologist, general practitioner, what have you. So clearly, I have focused not on corporate because I don't need corporate. So what have I focused on? I've obviously focused on what I need in my context for my business structure, my entity, and that has implications because what I've done, I tell you guys with regard to capital management, you need to document your rules. So I've done documentation for my entity. And that has resulted in documentation for my understanding of, frankly, the law as Congress writes it. So that the first step to starting to understand this stuff is to realize it's just like with capital management fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Now, that takes time to overcome. So clearly, when I first started this entire mm, road, there was fair bit of fear, like, am I right? Am I wrong? What if I'm understanding incorrectly? But over the years, that has subsided and coalesced into a great deal of confidence. So, and very clear, there's a very clear resultant from that fear equation. It's not that it's something to fear; it's something to be acknowledged. For instance, and obviously I have things up on the screen and I'll talk about all this stuff, but with regard to acknowledgement of fear, it's not fear that should be had, it's confidence and positioning and a capacity to express a position that you want to assert. You want to put forth that you understand something and you put it into document form. And that is exactly what compliance is. And that is exactly what reporting is. Now, fortunately, there's actually a very straightforward way to report your opinions. And you want substantiated opinions. You want bolstered opinions. You want strong opinions. And that's Form 8275 and 8275R, depending on what you need to report. But suffice it to say, opinions are a manifestation of due diligence, which results in expertise. Now, clearly, this is my appendix section for my primary entity document, trust document, and it is not small. And these are all either Supreme Court precedents, district court precedents, state precedents, but it's judges' rulings. And these are words from the mouth of a judge, and these are very powerful. There's actually two particular cases which I could emphasize. It was a Glenshaw Glass and Eisner v. McComb, and that is just such a foundation of so much of the realities in which we must engage. Uh, do I dig into those or make some other points? I might as well not digress. Eisner, I have it in another document. Probably right here. So Glenshaw Glass puts forward a very simple statement amongst the context of the case, which is interesting. But the takeaway from the case is a simple quote. And this is used in so much of uh, not just fear mongering, but also the status quo of how people should behave with regard to reporting and compliance. We have instances of undeniable accessions to wealth, clearly realized and over which the taxpayers have complete dominion. This is literally talked about so much in like the cryptocurrency space, and it's the foundation for a good part of all the outstanding IRS memorandums and the chief legal counsel talking about how to handle airdrops and claims and staking, and it's very straightforward. Complete dominion. Okay, that's a very simple phrase. Take possession under your control, capacity to exert influence with regard to transfers, sales, exchange, view. It's just dominion. It's actually a very good word. But there's a very important word or phrase in the center of this quote, clearly realized. And this is part of a very large equation that I engage with to weave a coherent, substantiated, justified, and cited story to craft what I do, what frankly all of you do, in a way that is a little bit more favorable than most people think. Most people rely on third party opinion from accountants, and it's a very passive stance. Like, all right, claim income, boom, income, everything it goes to income. It's not as straightforward as that. I mean, this quote is literally the foundation for so much of that argument. But there's a very important phrase here, clearly realized. And it's so simple because one of the most important things about law is language. I mean, that kind of makes sense, right? But this is semantics, the definition of words. You could literally take a quote, highlight one word, and have a conversation about it because the the significance of one word imparts intent. Intent is critical, especially the intent of Congress, scope, and what is the takeaway from this one word? Realized, tense, past tense, clearly realized. So clearly is just unambiguously, it's just obviously realized. So what is realized? And then that is a very simple word that takes you to, let's see here. Yeah, Eisner Macomber. Income may be defined as the gain derived from capital, from labor, or from both, provided it be understood to include profits gained through the sale or conversion of capital assets. This is really the case that defines realization. What is the act of realization? And this is really the basis for like IRC 1001. Well, no, it's not the basis because Congress defines the IRC. And then you have cases that discuss the reality or, in many regards, the ambiguity of Congress's words. But this case is about realization, which is IRC 1001, is the act of taking property, disposing of it, which is basically converting, I don't know, a token into stable coins. But that's not necessarily, there's no basis change. So that is something quite significant that I question regarding maybe the way a lot of accountants approach. Well, maybe that's obvious. Maybe because they understand basis. That's a relatively simple concept. There's no basis change. If you actually have a loss because of transaction fees and slippage. So if you're converting $100 worth of tokens into $98 worth of stable coins, it's literally a capital loss. Okay. Now the tokens are a critical thing to inspect very rigorously. Tokens, what are tokens? And this is obviously the great overtone of what the hell is going on here. And it really ties into a lot of the big court cases with the SEC about what is the composition, what is the nature of these assets. And the SEC, through Gensler, love to argue they were securities. Through the CFTC, uh, they strongly want to bring it under the umbrella of the commodities frameworks. But very obviously, or unambiguously, frankly, explicitly, the IRS, and I will show you if I could find it. It's clearly a big document coming in at 83 pages currently. The IRS, through not one, but two, three, four, five explicitly citable, referenceable sources indicates to them it's property. So, a very important takeaway there is property is not money. Money is a very simple thing, money. And frankly, you could define money, and that's the whole point. When you craft a document, it's very important for you to write definitions of what things are. Money refers to cash or cash equivalents. Very simple. Well, cash is a little bit of ambiguous as well. Like I define cash in the portfolio as stable coins and Bitcoin. So cash is a little bit ambiguous. But in this definition, generally accepted as a medium of exchange, store of value, unit of account, typically represented by legal tender in the form of currency issued by a recognized national government. Fiat coins, fiat currency coins. What's the difference? It also includes short-term liquidity, liquid financial instruments such as treasury bills, certificates of deposit, or money market funds. So that's how I define money in this instance. So it's very important to understand there is a very clear-cut distinction between money and property, and the IRS explicitly states all of crypto is property, which includes stablecoins, because they haven't given guidance. Now, that is partially for them to do because they're an agency and it's not for them really to give guidance. It's for Congress. That's the role of Congress is to define the rules. All the IRS can do is interpret the rules. So they issue their rulings and chief counsel advice and literally post on their damn FAQs, literally publicly accessible right now on the internet, is the FAQs that state virtual currency is treated as property and general tax principles applicable to property transactions apply to transactions using virtual currency. Okay, so the point of all this is IRS defines it as property. SEC used to define it all as securities, but they're working through a whole lot of shit over there. CFTC wants to define it as a commodity, but that's kind of irrelevant. What's pertinent is the way the IRS wants to treat this stuff. And we have resources, citable sources that say the IRS treats it as property. Now, guess what? We wait for Congress to make a statement. That takes forever. So the point is, everything's about interpretation, substantiation, and argument with regard to law. So when you make an argument, you bring in citable sources saying, all right, this is the way the IRS says to treat it as property, which is not cash, which is not a marketable security, which is not a cash equivalent. It says how quote unquote property, literally in public domain on the internet currently, aside from notices dating back to 2014. So you literally have 11 years of history with them saying it's property. So that's extraordinarily significant, and that plays right into Eisner versus v. Macomber. So property isn't money. Period. That's just a straight statement. Mic drop. So if property isn't money, Eisner v. Macomber indicates um, for a capital gain to occur, clearly you have to have a difference in values, and there's not going to be that difference in value if you're selling the stable coins. But if you're selling to another, if your asset appreciated, maybe Eisner v. Macomber isn't entirely relevant. Maybe Glenshaw Glass is complete domain. So, for instance, um, uh, property to money, like dollars in a bank account, that's clearly you taking possession, an accession of wealth. So, for instance, if there's any uh, untaxed basis, that is where Glenshaw Glass comes into the picture. Now, the question is, what is realized versus what is realization? So, to focus this conversation a little bit, it really is around the concept of the voter escrow partnership, which I started discussing the other day. Now, obviously, all this is a manifestation of stuff that I thought about for myself and I have used in other documents, for instance, the property receipts document, which I put on social media as well. But this bad boy is about 18 pages. And literally, the voter escrow partnership comes into the equation in a subsection because I go through a statutory decomposition, and it comes to IRC 731, which is about partnerships and more specifically about tax implications related to partnerships. And after a couple of back and forth comments on X the other day, was it literally just yesterday? It warranted a further decomposition about why and how would Section 731 be applicable. And that really comes down to the entities or the construction of entities, the nature of entities. Now, clearly, and this is exactly why I end these documents the way I do, that there's ambiguity, but that's not the point. There's always ambiguity. That's the whole reason why the judicial system exists, to take status quo, to take historic precedents, to take common opinion, a prevailing opinion, and make decisions. They're a decision making body that reaches conclusions called judgments. So, this is an argument. This is a presentation that's substantiated with congressional statement that attempts to digest and clarify congressional intent vis-a-vis the evaluation of IRC code, which is the word of Congress, and you break down the semantics of the words chosen to evaluate, assess, to ascertain intent. So intent is everything. What is the intent? So it turns out that it's not so simple. It's not everything you get is an accession of wealth. It's not as simple as that. I mean, you can't walk into a store and pay for things with stable coins or crypto or anything. Now, clearly, there's a concept of debit cards. There's the concept of realizing property asset into money that is readily available to settle a liability, which is exactly what a debit card does. But in the consumption of a debit card, you are in fact realizing a property instrument into money, which is literally Glenshaw glass, because clearly realized a property instrument and you have taken possession of it vis-a-vis the debit card infrastructure, and you are using it to settle a liability. So that's unambiguous. And obviously, Eisner v. Macomber, if there's a difference in value, so for instance, if you put stable coins on a debit card, there's going to be no difference in value between the conversion of stable coins and the readily accepted form of money that the debit card could use to spend. But if you put Bitcoin on a debit card, that you might have an Eisner v. Macomber type consideration for a change or a delta in the sale price versus the basis in the instrument. And then IRC 1001 is applicable. So all these nuances considered is very interesting to dig into this stuff. I love the subtleties and nuance, and it's like it's a puzzle. And it's a puzzle that's infinitely complex because not only you're dealing with real world practical considerations, you're dealing with the words of Congress, and then you assess the intent of the words chosen by Congress. Now, maybe a notable thing, which what like Clinton Donnelly's been talking about, is that the strength of the language used in IRS communications. Now, they're just an agency. So I take this into consideration. Like at first, when you start to engage with this type of topic, you have a fear like, oh, the IRS. They're just an agency. What matters really is, and this only comes after years of doing this kind of work, it's What matters is the words of Congress and then the judiciary, because the judiciary is going to interpret the words of Congress and evaluate it against arguments from an agency and arguments um, from a third party. And that in that instance is documents like this, which provide a capacity to analyze arguments from someone such as myself against an agency interpreted by the judiciary to understand them in the context of the words of Congress. So, notable in that regard is a case that played out in, when was Loper Bright? I have it here. Loper Bright was a big one. So there's two cases that got thrown around on social media, very popular amongst the cryptocurrency crowd. One of them was Loper Bright and the weakening of Chevron deference. I have it somewhere around here. Nope, further down, further up. Loper Bright. So Loper Bright, the conclusion was, I don't know if eliminated or weakened is appropriate, because this is obviously not a quote unquote text, and that is not something that is explicitly stated in the judge's ruling. But pertinent is a minimum the weakening of Chevron deference, which basically mandates that courts prioritize de novo. De novo means plain text, the reading of the statutory text, which is the IRC code, which means it's a level playing field, which means I have a capacity to read the text. IRS has a capacity to read the text. All right, great. We're all reading the text. We're all interpreting the text. And what you do is you write arguments based on semantics and language. And that's what these documents are. They're a manifestation of the de novo interpretation or the de novo reading of statutory text. Now, supporting Overbright was four subsequent cases in 2024. So this is pretty much not a weak Supreme Court ruling over Bright, because it was literally used in four very EPA related cases for high level. Here's FTC, but these two I believe were EPA related. Um, so significant. Literally, subsequent cases cited Loper Bright to come to conclusions. So Loper Bright basically puts little schmo, a little guy like me, on a level playing field with a government agency, and I found that very interesting because I could clearly read words, I could clearly read text, and the text out of Congress is very simple, and that means I have a great capacity to granularly deconstruct and break down these words, break down this wall. No, no, we're not in 1984 and Reagan territory. Break down these words at least. So I could do this, and that's what I've been doing over the last couple of years. Is literally like dissolving and distilling word by word what the hell this all means and how it's all connected together. So this particular document, the voter escrow partnership, is decent. It's not weak. So everything in law is about relative strength, relative strength of argument. So it's not a weak document. It's There's no established precedence. Means you can't cite a court case saying, oh, voter escrow's partnership. But the point is, in a post-Loper Bright era, what that means is um, the words as written by Congress. That's the meaning, and the agency, their historic interpretation, their their chief legal counsel, and their memorandums. It doesn't mean much. That it means significantly less. Like for instance, in a court case, you have to start with the statute as written, and then you build an argument. So this is how it would go: plaintiff versus defense. You would have to cite sources to say this is the statute, and this is why our interpretation is this. And I would do the same thing. And what I do is I encapsulate all of that into document form so that I don't have to remember it. but that's exactly what the point of a document is. Um, so this document is pretty interesting. It's on X. It's not bad. I put it together in about a day because clearly it's a manifestation of property receipts, and that's about a 17-page document. This I've been spending some weeks on, and this document is really a manifestation of this document, which is literally an 83-page document. So this is a derivative piece of work. No, not that. This is a derivative piece of work that is the distillation of so much that I've studied. Now, in my context, there's three types of entities. There's personal and individual, corporate, and trust, and they have very different rules. So corporate rules I have no experience with nor comprehension of. So I have no capacity to speak to them in any authoritative way. Individual, all right. To some degree, a lot of what I've done overlaps individual, particularly with regard to like IRC 61 to IRC 63. This is IRC 61. Anything less than this, and you're talking about like, taxation rules, because this is a little bit higher level, or maybe lower level, because you first have to assess what the hell is gross income, and then you go into like above the line omissions from gross income, which is IRC 62. And then you have IRC 63, which is basically the application of tax and the introduction of the concept of deductions. So IRC 61, except as otherwise provided in this part, gross income means all income from whatever source derived, including but not limited to the following stuff. So basically, I don't even know what the point is of giving this delineation. Whatever source derived. In fact, I would say Congress maybe shoots themselves a little bit in the foot by introducing a delineation. Now, not limited to is an interesting inclusion here because there's other places in IRC code that say including, and they don't say including but not limited to. So the takeaway really is that just saying including implies but not limited to, at least based on precedents that I've seen. So it's like, why even include this at all? Just say means whatever. They would have had a less They would have offered less of an attack surface, is a way I like to put it, because this is just a blanket statement. Like, how are you going to get around this? I mean, this sentence means all income, whatever source derived. Just there's no point in delineating. That's just my 2 cents. What's my 2 cents on how Congress crafts statute? But it turns out that my 2 cents was a great insight because I found a fair amount of precedence on the topic. And it turns out that the words they choose have implications, the semantic meaning of words. And that is this was a very interesting case, the Russello, the United States. And that crafts, well, at least what I call, if this may be like the common accepted terminology, I don't know, the Russello principle. And it was further used in Carcieri versus Salazar and Barnard v. Sigmund Cole. And it's the inclusion. Oh, here, is there quote unquote? Yeah, no, I don't have quote unquote. Maybe I do. Yeah, full quote. Where Congress includes particular language in one section of a statute, but omits it in another section of the same act, and the act is used, like literally subchapter A and subchapter J are all part of the same section, um, same act. So it's just a tremendous amount of breadth in this statement. It's generally presumed that Congress acts intentionally and purposefully in the disparate inclusion or exclusion. Oh my God, that's such good, such an incredible, quotable, directly citable statement from a judge's ruling. So that this is literally the assessment of intent. So this implies if they use one word and they use another word, it literally means something because you could safely assume that there's a great deal of intelligence that goes into the crafting of Congress's words. And if they use one or another, it means something. Um, I look into stuff like this very much like this is a big one for my investigation, the definition of income for trust purposes. So, like, what's the definition of income? These are, it gets incredibly not tedious, but meticulous. For fun fact. Yeah, here. So, for instance, there's a massive, monumental, earth-shattering difference between gross income, distributable net income, taxable income, and there's even a different. Was it 64? 64? No, no, that's 641. 64. Ah, shit! I know all this shit off the top of my head at this point. There's another definition: ordinary income. Jesus Christ! There's literally five types of income, at least that I've identified thus far. So income, quote unquote income, which income is it? No, but that's not relevant. That's relevant to my entity. That's not relevant to individuals. So it turns out what got me interested a little bit in writing this document yesterday was this is generally applicable to an individual. Now, what does that mean? An individual is just an individual. I mean, if you take your capital from um, your bank account and you're just an ordinary person and you go on Coinbase and you buy something, that's an individual. Not like you have a corporation and you get a salary from work and you transfer it to a corporation and you do appropriate accounting and record keeping in that regard, but it's a separate entity. It's a corporation, or same applies to like a trust type structure. It's a separate entity, but an individual is just a person. It's just a me unto myself. But this is generally applicable in this regard to an individual. Now, to a degree, it's a relatively is it so here's the semantics, here's the breakdown. Is it an aggressive position? Now, absent specific congressional guidance. Well, what is agency guidance? In a post Loper Bright era, I don't hold much weight in agency guidance because that's much less significant in a court of law. Because what you have to go on in a court of law is the word of Congress and then the arguments of the agency versus your arguments. So it is now a level playing field. Historically, pre-Loper Bright, you could literally say Chevron, Your Honor, Chevron deference, and include in your submitted documentation that this is our opinion. And then the court's like to the plaintiff, or the defendant against the IRS, for instance, the court defers to the agency's expertise. But that's not necessarily the case anymore in a post Loper Bright era. It has leveled the playing field, which is a great path that the system is heading, because that puts the power back in the states. That was the whole point of federalism. The founding fathers crafted federalism to break down the power of the federal government into the states. And the 10th Amendment of the Constitution strongly affords that. Unless the federal rules by Congress say something specific, it is the realm of the states to define the law. That's basically what the 10th Amendment says. Um, and in consideration of that, well, that's not really applicable. That's applicable to entities that are in the scope of states, which is literally a trust. A trust is an entity of the state, it's not an entity of the federal government. But in regard to an individual, I found this very interesting, the concept of a partnership. Now, I would have hoped that this would have been a more interesting topic. Only 37 people on the stream because this is literally everyone's situation, especially folks that have listened to me over the years. You deposit capital into a voting escrow contract, VECRV, VL. CVX, or pick your favorite voter escrow contract partnership. And then what this document does is it breaks down what is a partnership. And turns out it's pretty straightforward. Um, Here, this is should be italicized. I italicized quotes so I could easily identify them. Unincorporated. A partnership is unincorporated organization through or by means of which any business, financial operation, or venture is carried on. Now, in typical congressional fashion, this is extraordinarily broad, not vague, because it says business, financial operation, or venture is carried on. So now, if I wanted to further enhance literally just this part one, this initial introduction to this idea, I would break down business, financial operation, or venture and see what Congress has to weigh in on the definition of those terminologies. But to skip over that part for now, clearly we have discussed the five businesses of crypto. The reason I identified them historically as five businesses because they are literally an entity, smart contract or not. It's an entity that offers a product or a service that generates revenue. And then the question is, what happens with that revenue? It gets distributed. Distributed to who? Depositors of voter escrow. It is clearly so arguable to be a partnership. I mean, if anything, from a corporate standpoint, that's like an S corp. I mean, seriously, right? That's the extent of what I know about like corporate stuff. It's a pass-through entity in regards. The business is doing some shit. It's making revenues and it's just distributing it. And in that instance, the business doesn't have any like tax liabilities, but this is complicated because it's a piece of software. So it's uncharted territory. But the point is, it is distributing those revenues to partners. And that partnership model is a result of voter escrow positions. So that's what I break down. Who's the parties, the contribution, the mutual benefit, all this stuff is how you define a partnership. So it's clearly mutual benefit. It's clearly a contribution you have to deposit to acquire a position, which is um, participation in the partnership arrangement. The parties are obvious. You have a contract or the voter escrow contract, which is a protocol, and yourself. So there's two parties involved. I break down the power because clearly the protocol has power. It has the concept of governance, and especially in the case of like Curve, it has all these levers to pull with regard to gauge weights and not just proposals, but like A factors and all of the levers to pull. So that's governance. So there's clearly powers involved. And the parallel is this mirrors how partners in traditional venture collectively manage operations. And in this instance, consensus driven by voting. What does it sound like? It sounds like a board. All right. With the depositors acting as active contributors to the protocol's direction. All right, great. It's pretty simple. So the analogy is I don't see it as any way other than strong. That's a very strong analogy. Governance thus transforms depositors into partners with a voice of the protocol's future. Partnership written all over it, in my opinion. So the revenue, there's a clear revenue source, products, financial products and services offered. So clearly, um, maybe during like discovery or whatnot, they documentation on a per protocol level would be warranted to break down the products and services offered by the partnership, and they're identifiable. That's all. Just put that into words relatively quickly, and that those revenues are distributed. These revenues are distributed to depositors as property because the IRS unambiguously states in five citable sources that all virtual currencies, they literally call it virtual currencies, were they a bunch of boomers? Cryptocurrencies are property. Period. Full stop. They said it. I didn't even say it. I mean, literally, here, for the fun of it, if you what is it? 36.19. I don't have bookmarks in this thing. I should have put bookmarks. Is it 36.19? 36.39. Check this out. I mean, this is pretty simple, right? This is the IRS website. And you go to what is virtual currency? Well, here, question two. And then the virtual currency is treated as property. I mean, it's on the internet. It's literally on the damn internet. Aside from their actual notices from their legal staff, their counsel, it's literally right there. So anyway, it's distributed as property. No money involved. Period. So that's not as simple. It's not just because you're not getting money that there's a difference in taxable considerations. There's a great deal of nuance between property and money. So that's what the whole point of this is, to break that down. The subtlety, proportional to their lock tokens and governance influence. Very simple. You get a distribution of property because of your participation in the partnership. This resembles profit sharing in a conventional partnership where partners benefit based on their contributions. It's literally written in the IRC, and that's the nature of a business, financial operation, or venture in traditional partnership form. Here's a little breakdown of the fact that it's relatively novel. I don't care about novel. That's like saying the computer systems are running on COBOL, which they are at the IRS, and I'm like, all right, fuck, just update that shit. So there's nothing wrong with novel. The only problem with novel is that the system is so slow to deal with it. And I got no problem stating my opinion. Clearly, I'm the voice. I I like to hear myself speak, so I state my opinion. Novel is not an impediment. It does not produce any friction for me and my personality in any way, shape, or form. I got no problem being novel. But it's novel, but it's completely analogous structurally, mechanically, not just analogous. It's mechanically the same thing, kind of like how stablecoins are mechanically dollar deposits in a bank account. Risk reward, we share in the risk, we share in the reward. There's no conventional liabilities because there's no real estate, there's no staff, employees whatsoever. So it's novel in some regards. Duration and flexibility. There's clear rules in the partnership. You have a lock period, and that's your duration. And there's flexibility, and depending on the protocol's rules, for instance, maybe there's an early termination. Maybe you could claim, like Shadow, for instance, could exit early, and those are the rules. Depending on the rules, you may have transferability. So there's rules in these contracts. So interestingly, what is a core component of a partnership? The contract between the partnership and the contributor, the partner. Contract. So it just so happens you're literally engaging with a smart contract instead of a dumb contract. Very interesting. Where the contract itself is literally a business. Isn't that's what's so fascinating about this. Not only is it analogous, it's like, okay, this is what we've been talking about for years. Literally been talking about this for years. Smart contracts. So that's something that I do, something that most people overlook. And me, it's like, oh shit, property isn't money. We're dealing with smart contracts and EVM networks. They're contracts. In crypto, it's not crypto. There's businesses, actual businesses, where the contracts are businesses. How many businesses? What kind of businesses? Oh, just so happens that there's five businesses. There's literally five businesses in crypto that we've talked about. You guys get this by now. Adaptable nature of partnerships tailored to the voter escrow structure. Implicit duties. You got implicit duties. You got voting rights. You got to vote. You got to take care of your contribution to make sure you contribute to the success and well-being of the partnership. No formal duties, but anyway, you people are incentivized to participate. Oh, incentives. Incentives rule the world. That's what gets people to act. And here's the big one, Section 8. I mean, it's big for this document. Section 731 is the tax considerations for a partnership. So it turns out there's very explicit IRC code 731B and 731A1. 731B is not relevant to you, that's relevant to the protocol, which gets complicated because it's not a person nor a tax reporting entity. What the hell does that even mean? Anywho, 731A is for you, the partner. Quote unquote, gain shall not be recognized to a partner except to the extent that any money distributed exceeds the adjusted basis of such partner's interest in the partnership immediately before the distribution. Fortunately, in law, there's property and money. Money, property. Boom, barrier. Two separate conversations. What is money? What is property? So I noticed that 731A1 didn't talk about property, but 731B did, which I found interesting. No gain or loss shall be recognized to a partnership on the distribution to a partner of property, so including money. But the point there is they specifically use the word property there, so maybe the Rosella principle has some use there. So that implies if the partnership is distributing property, that the partner is receiving what was distributed. So it's a relatively safe assumption that what is stated in 731B carries over to 731A, even though 731B comes after 731A. That's just causality there, cause and effect. It is that there, if you're distributing this, you're someone's receiving what is being distributed. Pretty simple logic and reason there. So, based on the distribution, that means that the partner can receive property or money. So, blanket statement gains shall not be recognized to a partner, comma. And then the second component of the sentence deals with money. So, we're talking about property. It's unambiguously property. It is stated to be property in five citable sources. All of crypto is property, whether it is a volatile crypto instrument or a stablecoin. It is property, barring further congressional congressional guidance, not agency interpretation. In other words, gains are only triggered if the partner receives cash. Great. If you get cash, which we're not getting cash, cash is money, money or a cash equivalent, which is basically classically a CD or money market deposit or like a T bill, for instance. But we're not in the even close to in the realm of a cash equivalent, albeit unless there's actual congressional guidance that says stablecoins are cash equivalents. So there is stablecoin bill in Congress, and we'll get to see what the law actually says. So I do find that interesting. It's imperative to keep up with what comes out of Congress because they set the rules, not the agencies. Um, okay, so gains and basis. It's important to track basis. So what's your basis? If you receive, $1,000 worth of ABC coin as an emission, as a distribution of property, that becomes your basis. The basis carries over, and therefore, if you uh, convert it to a stable coin, there's no basis change because the value, well, if you convert to a stable coin immediately upon receipt, and that is a very important consideration, depending on how you structure your individual operations and how I handle my business, I have that as a very unambiguous rule. Immediately upon receipt of a distribution of property, it is to be sold to stable coins, which technically is a capital loss. It is not a gain, it is a loss because of slippage and transaction fees. $1,000 turns into $990 because of the conversion process. Um, so there's no capital gains associated with that. So technically, you can get crafty in your legal documentation, be like de minimis accounting. De minimis is all right, fine. I got a capital loss. I don't care. There's it's part of the equation. It's part of the cost of doing business. I don't need the future deduction. So I tend to say it significantly simplifies the equation. And there's ways to state that you're going to do accounting that significantly simplify the equation uh, under the concept of de minimis accounting. It's a capital loss, but I don't need it in the future. I just really give a shit about simplifying my accounting process, which is already insane because they want every single transaction to be documented. Anywho, so that basically means if you're getting distributed property, it's not income, it's not a capital gain. So there's no tax liability associated with the claim button and acquiring property as a result of your engagement in a partnership. Now, if you immediately sell the stable coins, now you have $990 worth of stable coins. That that's it. Period. Now, if you exchange that for something to Bitcoin or whatever, now that Bitcoin is a variable price, so you have to track basis and you have capital gains associated with that. Um, what gets interesting is if you take those stable coins and convert it to dollars in a bank account. So I would say that that's Glenshaw Glass territory, dominion, complete dominion. You are realizing the stable coins into money, from property to money, and in the past tense, because you are realizing it. Therefore, they have been realized to money and have taken dominion. So I would say that that's basically a basis of zero because you inherited basis, and I wouldn't be the aggressive person and say, all right, there's no basis is the same in money form. I am not that aggressive. That just basically means you're claiming from voter escrow and you can spend whatever you want and there's no tax liability. So that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't gel. That doesn't reconcile. But this entire setup basically says you're claiming voter escrow, you're converting to stable coins, and you're accumulating capital only when you convert to dollars in a bank account is that the taxable event, which you could literally argue is a basis of zero because you got it from a distribution, just basically you didn't have it before, therefore you acquired it. Now you are disposing of it. So a basis of zero is an interesting argument. And frankly, from an agency tasked with collecting tax revenue, they should find that appealing because you're in a partnership, you're getting property. There's no event according to 731, and you convert to stable coins. There's no event because there's a capital loss, de minimis accounting, but you're converting to dollars and spending that. So a basis of zero kind of reconciles this entire framework into something that's like, all right, fine. We clearly see a distribution of property, and you're ultimately on the hook for tax liability in this end of the equation, the extraction to money, the conversion of property to money. So that makes a great deal of sense. So you're bringing home this entire entity's framework, having a reasonable and expected tax liability ultimately when you convert to money. So anywho, I think that more or less summarizes this document, and I conclude it's just a conclusion. Focus. So this is like guidance for accountants on how to frame all this. The claim button as an entity distribution. I mean, literally, that's what it is. It's unambiguous. So it's not a taxable event. Just the claiming of it was taxable. Taxable is either income tax, or capital gains. Those are two types of taxable events. So you have to track basis to understand potential future tax implications. It's clearly tax efficiency because now you have property which can easily be reinvested into partnerships. So you're growing, uh, you're investing and bolstering the success of business. So there's an efficiency associated with it. So practical guidance, you got to understand post Loper Bright landscape. This is important guidance for any accounting firm. Um, it basically means 8275 is your friend, not your enemy, and it's not something to be feared. It's just an agency. They're just doing the job of Congress. So they're not the source of truth. Congress is the source of truth. So any accountant really needs to understand that reality, and that's post Loper Bright. Prioritize statutory text over agency interpretation. All of uh, all of these rules from it's not rules, it's rulings here. Ruling 2019-24, ruling 2014-21. Chief counsel advice is just a lawyer. A lawyer's interpreting things. Chief counsel advice, just a lawyer. And their FAQs. This is unambiguous. So these are just their opinions until you have congressional statement. But absent statement from Congress, their opinion is at least meaningful because even though their opinion says what to do with this property, Congress says this is what you do with this property. So they are stating these interpretations based on, all right, fine, it's property. Here's what you do with it in these rulings. I'm pointing to the screen, trying my best, but they completely neglect increasingly structured business entities, partnerships, corporate rules, trusts. So all of that in the IRC code is a much stronger argument than pretty much anything, any opinion that's unsubstantiated in any of these documents. Unless you point to statute, unless you point to IRC XYZ, it's just an opinion. And post Loper Bright, that opinion carries little to no weight in the judiciary setting. Um, so the final recommendation, 8275, that shit. Y- y- Like this document, I put it on X, wrote over to the accountant. It may change the equation. I mean, obviously, if you've been rigorous, because over the last 2 years, especially, I've been talking strongly about just invest in businesses and collect your capital, reinvest in businesses, have a structured portfolio between quote unquote cash and investments and your business revenue. And if you did that, um, technically there's basically no tax liability unless you realized any property to money and took full, clear, unambiguous dominion of it in a traditional money institution, like a bank account. Now, this is a very substantiated position to take, and I don't use this. I use something stronger. What is it? What the fuck is? How the captain could use something stronger? I have a. It's not applicable to individuals. This document is individual, framing as a partnership, but I have other statute that further strengthens it. But you have to get into like corporate and trust in order to further strengthen this argument. So this actually isn't the core of my position. This is just the way I frame it on my 8275 is, yeah, I got all these rules and like subchapter J and whatnot, and like at the top it all off, the little cherry on top, is the partnership. So that it's actually a stronger argument than this could possibly be on an 8275. Now the reality is it's an uncharted position, but that's the point of an 8275 is to state this is my position. This is what I see. This is what I understand. Here's my opinions. Here's my justification. Here's my support. Here's my reasoning. Thank you very much. I am fully transparent and reporting without evading. That's the most important point. Never evade. Let me explain why. Quote unquote. Here's quote unquote, and it's all hyperlinked. Tax avoidance. Avoidance is legal. Tax avoidance is not tax evasion. You must report everything. You must open that QuickBooks and be like, here's the username and password, and here's a read only user. How about it? And it's not evasion, it's avoidance. And here's the quote unquote avoidance reflects statutory form to lessen immediate tax liability. Actually, that's my sentence. And form absent exceptional circumstances reflects substance. So if you are crafting documents like this is form, and absent exceptional circumstances, it reflects on the substance because I put in my due diligence to create this form, understand the rules. I've crafted an entity to execute according to these rules. Therefore, the form reflects substance, absent like exceptional circumstances like evasion, like omission, or subversion, or lying, or cheating. So that's a great quote. And these quotes are direct from cases. This is Edwards versus Commissioner. And now, persons may adopt any lawful means for the lessening of the burden of taxes, which in one form or another may be laid upon property or profits. This plays into basically the IRM, the Internal Revenue Manual. There's a big difference between avoidance and evasion. This is from Edison, California stores versus McColgan. When was this? This was back in 1947, the good old days. Isn't that remarkable? Follow the law. The law isn't written by the IRS. The law is written by Congress. All right. Next step. Read what Congress wrote, called the Internal Revenue Code. Then, if you really want to blow your freaking mind, I'm no joke. This is what they talk about on television. The Code of Federal Regulations, written by the Treasury Department. This is basically the interpretation, or the Treasury's interpretation. Guess what? It's still a damn interpretation. It's the interpretation of the IRC. This is where they get verbose and they break it down. This is what, how big is the CFR? The CFR is 200 volumes. How many words? How long is if 200 volumes, 50 titles? I don't know this number of words. Did they literally put a section? Oh my God, this is how verbose it is. They literally have a clause in the CFR called number of words. That's fucking disgusting. How many words is it? Where's the AI response? 200 volumes, 50 titles. Yeah, but they don't say how many words is the CFR. I don't know. I heard it on TV the other day. Pages. How many pages are the CFR? It's like 19 million pages. I don't know. I don't think that's right. I don't know, but it's something like that. It's some absolutely absurd, disgusting number. Massive millions of pages or something like that. Okay, that's it. I wanted to talk about this because I put it out on social media, and this is a, an item that's more so relevant to people as compared to corporations or trusts. So I figured this is a little bit more consumable and interesting, applicable, useful. It's like literally just do your thing in crypto and make your accountant aware of this document and this kind of like. I mean, the accountant basically needs to be an attorney to understand this. Um, I kind of write like an attorney nowadays. I don't write like a judge. Those judges have a certain style in their writing, but these are strong, substantiated, uh, argumentative documents that assert a particular position. Is this a good one? I actually reference it, as I said, here in this document in chapter 731 partnerships. In the context of this memorandum, the phrase entity distributions of property or entity distribution, distribution of non-monetary property refers to a partnership distribution of property. Okay. Not money to a partner of the partnership. And here's the voter escrow partnership. So interlace, interweave your documents and craft a powerful position to assert what you believe is the truth. You have that right. Okay. The advisor of the house will go through some commentary. Otherwise, I got a meeting at about 2 o'clock. Shabbat shalom. Always a pleasure, my friend. Can you talk later about the launch of resupply? Resupply is just going to collapse rates on CRVUSD and Frax. So there's just rates are going to be very low, and this is ballooning somewhat like an M2 supply. It's just increasing the currency supply at the expense of RSUP. How do we know that? If you go over here, you can see RSUP. So RSUP is the load bearer, and frankly, it has 112 mil of market cap to get dismantled as it continues to expand the supply of CRVUSD and fractional circulation. Um, this should stabilize though. So the whole point of finance is that everything finds an equilibrium. So fees get generated. So this will be interesting when they start allocating, RSUP to vote to vote rentals. Once they start doing that, that should be interesting. All these protocols are connected, and I look forward to seeing where this finds equilibrium. It's literally a day, and you can't tell anything a day in, but what you can tell is that flows, curve supply has significantly increased. Um, CRBUSD, 108 mil. It's like 68, 72 mil yesterday. That's a significant increase. And look at the rates. So it's 108 mil with rates at basically near zero. Very interesting. So I look forward to seeing what plays out. Simple as that. How bullish is it the ecosystem? Well, curve. It is literally. I just had a, everything I just talked about today is about a partnership. Literally, they are the first. They it's not even. I know synthetics was the first with like the emissions and what they built, but it's the first governance. It's not just governance because you have to have entity distributions. I mean, really, the entity distributions curve very well could have been the first voter escrow partnership. I can't really think of anything earlier as a compound. No, it's different. It wasn't what uh, Curve was doing. Curve was literally you literally deposited, you got emissions because of the nature of the business to generate revenues, and then the protocol, the partnership distributes that those revenues as property to the depositors. That's what CRVUSD, VECRV is. And then you're also voting on proposals and you're voting on gauge weights. Might be the first voter escrow partnership. Curve. Good morning, Cap. Much pleasure as soon. Hope everything is well. Peter, hello. Ida and Cap, did you see Lutnick's interview with Chamath and Freeberg? What are your thoughts on tariffs and politics? Politics. Uh, Listen, tariffs or taxation. I, I don't know. It's so contentious. I don't want to. I don't like talking about contentious things, other than things that I'm in control over, and that's why I have a degree of comfort talking about law and taxation at this point because I have control over that. It's something that I understand. But when you're talking about like geopolitics and politics, everyone has a different opinion and it gets so controversial. It's not like anything I said is controversial today. It's literally just an argument with substantiated documentation, references to court cases, references to statutes. It can't be contentious. It's just a presented argument in strongest form possible. Income taxes of 150K and above in the US, I would very much appreciate that. I get hammered on my W-2 taxes. I get hammered because I also have obviously sales tax and property tax and fees and registration fees and insurance. Fuck. Adulting is not fun. You know what's worse? The only thing worse than adulting is understanding how the system works and realize how your fuck's left 6 ways from Sunday. I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of so much of what the federal government does. Everything is about cost benefit, meaning I have a cost. What am I getting? The fuck are they giving me? What am I getting? I clearly understand the whole military concept. I understand a lot of components of federal government, but I don't want to get contentious. It's state and local fire, local ambulance, local hospital, local roads, local police, local water, waste management. That's a clear benefit, cost benefit. So you get a very clear sense of what you get for local. I'm pretty sure most people at the federal level think they're getting fucked because you probably are. And that's the extent of what I'll give in my opinion of federal taxation. What, you could probably cut it in half with all the bullshit they spend their money on? Okay. I don't want to. I have enough burden with local and personal financial obligations. Now I have to take on these federal obligations. I'm not fond of that. They are spending our money for us rather than asking us what we want to spend our money on. That's not fair. That's not reasonable. We used to have a thing called no taxation without representation. So the whole point is representation is all right. Hey guys, what do you think we should spend our money on? That's representation. There is no representation anymore at all. Evening Cap, I'm from Playback Cure, but sometimes I catch a lot. Much a pleasure. Thanks for it all. You're very welcome. I try my best. Playback, bro. Playback. Bots and stuff. Do property to property swaps, WE to USDC also result in realization? No, that's a capital gain or capital loss. It's property to property. Get it? It's not income. It's property to property. So what's the difference in basis? So if you compare it $1,000 in Bitcoin to that you own at $1,000, so you bought Bitcoin at $1,000 and you sell that Bitcoin at $1,000 to USDC. You have you put $1,000 in, you have $1,000 worth of stable coins. There's no capital gains. The minimus accounting rules could simplify the accounting, and in that particular equation. But if you bought $1,000 worth of WETH and you're able to sell it for $1,200 of USDC, it's a capital gain. IRC 1001, Glenshaw Glass, all day long. It's different with regard to money, because money is unambiguously Glenshaw Glass. So if here, for instance, if you have $1,000 worth of WETH and you sell it for $1,000 worth of dollars in a bank account, what was the basis and how much? So it's not just basis. How much taxes have you paid on that $1,000 of WETH? So, for instance, if you got that WETH as an entity distribution and you converted it to stable coins because you don't want well, let's put it this way: if you got $1,000 worth of WETH as an entity distribution of property, $1,000 received, and you are able to sell it because let's say there's no volatility for whatever reason, you sell it for $1,000 of stable coins. Right, so there's no capital gain because it's received 1,000, converted the property to a property for 1,000. But then if you convert that property, those stable coins to money, Glenshaw Glass, you realize it, making it have been realized and have clear dominion over it, and you have not there has been no tax liability. So that means you have to realize at zero basis. You get it? At least that's what I see balances the equation. Literally, IRC 731 says there's no obligation. So if there's no obligation here, there's no obligation here. At some point, what is it? The tax man cometh. At some point, they're going to get what they expect to get. So they get it. All you could do. So okay, okay. It's kind of like matter and energy. Matter can neither be created nor destroyed. Same thing with taxes. You can't create it nor destroy it. All you could do is transfer it. So, which is what is a very fundamental principle in tax law called deferral. All you could do is affect the timing of taxation. That's it. And then that's literally what like IRAs and Roth IRAs do in many regards, albeit a Roth IRA is a very interesting product because that applies the taxation first. And then that's very interesting how a Roth IRA works. And even an IRA too. Untaxed money goes in, untaxed, untaxed, and you only pay taxes after 50 years, and there's no capital gains at all in an IRA. In a Roth IRA, there's no capital gains at all, but when you take money out, you have no tax liability also from a Roth IRA. So that's just an interesting one. So it just so happens there's other structures other than IRAs and Roth IRAs that are right. All right, that's pretty interesting. So it turns out it appears that crypto has created this voter escrow partnership type structure, which produces a very clear set of rules, just like we just described with IRAs and Roth IRAs. This is a partnership. Good morning, Fuku. Mix. Thanks for reading some. Certainly is the small print, huh? Certainly is. Zero. How can you start to adapt this to another revenue generating partnership? No. That's not necessarily a revenue generating partnership. I what did the reality is that's liquidity provisions. There's this document is on X. This document has nothing to do with liquidity provisions, broad staking, broadly staking. This is voter escrow only, and this has nothing to do with airdrops at all. This is a very, very specific situation where a partnership exists because you are responsible for the success and operation of the partnership, of the business. Liquidity provisions are not applicable, my friend. Um, Anthony, good morning. Much a pleasure. We'll wrap it up in a couple minutes. Tape Pusher, been here since Digibite days. Did she? Ren nose. Oh my God, Ren nose. I still have my Ren nose. They're going to come online and I'm going to be like, all right, that's cool. Whatever. It is what it is. That's just the way I went about thinking about them into the future. I'm a very long-term mindset kind of guy. Eggs, Sambos. Oh dear. This channel is an OS upgrade. Oh my goodness. Where where we were and where we've come to. This is a whole nother level, my friend. We've been through a lot, obviously, together. Much a pleasure. It's been an honor to have you here amongst everyone that's been around all the years. Peter P, great stream cap. These docs are well structured, excellent research. Thank you very much. I've tried my best, and I just not easy. This isn't just AI. So obviously, this is a good part. Like a lot of the initial work that I do is AI, but then it's my language. I improve it with my language, and then I reprocess it. I do validation with AI that the structure, the coherence, the semantics is strong, presentable, powerful, substantiated, citations, quotations. So I use it as a tool. These are my words. So this is not certainly isn't an easy exercise. But over years of work, you absorb and assimilate these words, and you could craft these kinds of documents. You got a couple new cases to study here. Here, not this one here. There's some. This is my the property receipt. This is on X. 10th Amendment, obviously big one. Commissioner, State of Bosch, that's a big one for trust purposes. Freuler versus Helvering, that's trust purposes. Eisner v. Macomber, that's personal individual tax rules. Russello is individual, but that's such an remarkable set of cases, these three cases. I find that so extraordinary because it's an expression of unius est exclusio alterius, Latin. You go back to the basics of language. The principle expressio unius est exclusio alterius, Latin for the expression of one thing is the exclusion of another. That carried right over into the Russello v. the United States. That's such, God, that I love language. It's an art. It really is to break down a single. I have documentation that breaks down a single word, and we obviously do that with Glenshaw Glass, with past tense of realized, and Eisner v. Macomber focusing on realization. So a verb versus past tense. Subtlety. One word means everything. This is a key one. Internal Revenue Manual. What was it? 26 USC 7201, avoidance distinguished from evasion, straight out of their manual. Loper Bright, that's a big one. Big, big, big. Edward v. Commissioner, big quotes, big quotes. Weeks v. Sibley, internal revenue, creation of trust to lessen tax liability held legal. That's quote unquote, baby. Persons may adopt any lawful means for lessening the burden of taxes which in one form or another may be laid upon property and profits. Quote unquote from judgment. Anywho, this is from IRS 0331614. Check this out for the fun of it. Definition of income. Watch this. Document statistics. As of, I'm going to end on this note, as of January 2nd, 2004, 21 years ago, in 21 years, how many people have read this document? 8,771. 21 years, 8,771 people have read this document. Shows you how many people have exercised an OCD level of due diligence. What business structure would you adopt for a crypto portfolio if you were single and had no kids? Well, you can't do a trust. You can't. You need a beneficiary. Um, funnily enough, there's certain laws where an animal could be a beneficiary, which is literally just I've I've seen it all. I've seen movies where, and they played it as a joke, but in real life, it's like that's fucking manipulative. Where a dog was a beneficiary and inherited a house, and it was really weird. And then you're like, that's not much of a joke. That's kind of actually scary. Uh, that movie. But technically, there is actual laws where an animal could be a beneficiary. So I wouldn't, I couldn't stomach that. I I need a degree of confidence and clarity and certainty in anything that I build, and I wouldn't be comfortable with that. Single and no kids. Y- Folks may laugh at me. Become unsignal and have a kid because that affords a great structure to take care of your kids. So the power of a trust is administration. You can administer a trust for very explicit purposes, and that is defined. That's the whole point of a trust is you get to build and define the rules of the trust. So kids, state that is the purpose. What is the trust obligations and responsibilities? What is it required to administer? Property, but that's a big one. Like own a home, have you? Um, Single. Well, well, I would say you don't need an entity. In my opinion, I like if I was knowledgeable like I am now and single and not married and kids and whatnot. I guess an individual, and I would just be you have less considerations, simpler equations. So I'd probably just keep it as an individual. I wouldn't do a corporation. There's literally reporting requirements with a corporation. No, corporations are meant for people, like literally employees and stuff like that. I wouldn't do a corporation. Just do an individual. I wouldn't even do a business. I wouldn't even do like sole proprietorship. I just you as an individual. So now, what are this is that's what this document is in regards, but this is very crypto centric. You this doesn't exist outside of crypto in the same way because to engage in a partnership in the real world, it's a whole who's your friend and getting introduced and counterparties and having an inside scoop to engage in a partnership. Meanwhile, literally, this is just a publicly accessible partnership. It's like, all right, I want to be part of this partnership. Click. So that's the difference here, and that's why this kind of changes the entire equation for so much of a capacity to take advantage of something that exists. Partnerships are not just readily available. That's a whole private thing in many regards, like having to have close contacts. I don't know. It's not. It's for me to discuss the considerations, individual, corporate, trust, and these are just entities, just writing words on a piece of paper and rules. So I don't have a recommend. I don't recommend. That's one thing I always say. Like I never talk about recommending instruments or assets or positions or things to buy. That's not for me to do. And it's the same with regard to business. For me to talk about these things because it's shit that I've done so much work on, and by talking about it allows me to organize everything in my mind. Dinner table investing style. If you can't tell a good story about what you're doing, gotta level up. That's your goal. Hope that helps, Teddy. Gonna wrap it up in a minute. You think about getting private letter. You know how much that shit costs? Do you have any idea how much that shit costs? In my opinion, is I'd rather get a private judiciary. I My opinion is they are an agency, and what matters is the judiciary. Maybe that's just arrogance, but it's not arrogant. I'm not an arrogant guy. I'm a humble motherfucker. That's just real. They aren't what they think they are. They aren't what people think they are. This is just an agency. Literally, you got the whole government right now gutting agencies. And literally you had court cases from the judiciary, Loper Bright, and the four subsequent cases that said, all right, guys, take a step back. You don't have that much power. That's my opinion. Because what is a private letter ruling going to do? It's going to go to their chief counsel and attorneys. What did I just do? What the hell did I just spend all these years on? Breaking down 83 pages of semantics. I literally did exactly what they do. I've read everything they wrote with regard to things that are relevant to what I do. And that's what my documents are. It's basically the same type of thing that they did. Just here's the code, here's the IRC code, except I went further than what they did. They looked at statute, but I looked at more statute. And then I looked at cases that talk about how to look at statute. I mean, that's literally what um, it's literally what the Russell principle is called canons of statutory construct. It's like literally shit out of law school is how do you build a statute? What goes into it? The structure of it? How do you choose one word versus another? And what is that meaning with regard to the delivery of intent? Anywho, no, I get focused on what principle Congress, what judiciary says, not the edge. Yeah. So you're not going to get that out of the agency. They're going to give you their interpretation. So that's the whole thing. So what I would do if you want that confluence is you could talk to attorneys, but that all costs money. You want to go to a private letter ruling, it's 30, 40, $50,000 for a private letter ruling. You want talk to an attorney to read your documents, probably like 5, 10 grand. Everyone has in the end, it's the same thing I say about capital management. You got to do what you got to do to be able to sleep at night. You got to find your comfort zone. You got to eliminate your anxiety, and you got to do what you got to do to get to that point where it's like, all right, I'm good. I understand what I'm doing, and I'm comfortable, confident. Everything is buttoned up, ducks are in a row, and then that's a very important thing. And that's not just legal; that's capital management. That's the whole point of this stream, really, is we mostly talk about the crypto space, which is the most insane, volatile environment to be able to have no anxiety in. Imagine that. All right, let's wrap it up for today, ladies and gentlemen of the crypto space. Friday, March 21st at 1:45 p.m. 68 people made it to the end of the stream. Thank you all for joining me today. You are all now that much more rational because of it. Just shows you, just 2 seconds, 2 seconds. It just shows you this weekly. Everyone's gone. Everyone left. There's no one left. They all didn't see. It hasn't even started yet. And there's no one left. But that also means, you know what that means, ladies and gentlemen. That's the nature of capital management. The few remain. When this thing breaks that 200, things start to get interesting. And we'll be here talking about it. I'm probably going to be jumping around when this thing starts to go lower, 102 or lower. Be very interesting. Anyway, enjoy your weekend. Stay calm. Find your peace. Sit in a sauna. Reflect. Meditate. Do what you got to do to find the zone where you're like your happy place, as Happy Gilmore said. Okay. Be well. See you guys next week. Until then, peace.